another Semrush webinar, and here we go. It tells me live 1 second. Great. So I'll just give everyone a moment to join in. Pop us in the comment where you're based, what brought you here. Have you been to any of our previous webinars? And we're excited to have the show run with you today. This webinar is called Engineers versus Marketers, because I think we are all somewhere on the spectrum if we're in digital marketing. I think we never really get around some structure and some spreadsheets and some thinking about how algorithm works. And on the other hand, we're thinking about our users, we're thinking about our customers and the psychology of marketing and how can we reach people, what is our brand. But I suppose on that spectrum, we all sit in different positions. And in the last 2 webinars, we had a lot of fun seeing where the differences in worldviews are, what kind of conclusions do marketers come to, what kind of conclusions do engineers come to, where the differences, where the similarities. And this one is a particularly exciting topic, and I think a somewhat age-old discussion of the internet, which is basically technical SEO versus user experience. What do we really optimize for? Do we care mainly about what Google and the algorithm wants? Do we care about what users and human wants? Is there a common ground? And I think it's going to be a really, really interesting discussion. And whilst everyone is logging in, I saw some people already calling in from Michigan. I see some people from Portugal, from the UK. So excited about this. So let me kick this off by introducing our panelists for today. And I'll kind of start in a reverse alphabet. So I want to kick this off with Quinn. Quinn has joined today, and she's the CEO and founder of Conversion Crimes, a usability testing platform striving to bridge knowledge gaps for easy and affordable CRO for all types of business owners. And I've known her for a few years, and I know how she works and how talented and smart she is. And she actually has already 15 years of experience in UI, UX design, running a CRO-focused agency called Seda Labs. So we're excited to have you on board, Quinn, today to tell us more about UX and the things that you've seen in your agency and now in your new platform as well.
Amazing, thank you.
Secondly, also on the UX side of things, we have Jess. Jess Weiss is a UX researcher based in Salt Lake City, and she has over 12 years experience in SaaS, marketing, CRO, and content strategy. But the thread that followed through was the role of people. She acts as a human advocate in software and tech, and she relies on observation, active listening, psychology, empathy, and storytelling to build systems that empower people and improve their lives. So excited to have you on, Jess.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And then from the SEO side of things, which is also my side of things, we have Bastian today on the call, who is the CEO and co-founder of Peak Ace, a renowned expert in large-scale international SEO, managing sites of almost any size in highly competitive industries. With more than 20 years of experience in online marketing, technical and global SEO, Bastian was also named Search Personality of the Year last year. Welcome acknowledgement to his contribution to a rapidly evolving industry. So excited to have you on, Bastian.
Thanks for having me.
And just to round it up, you might see me before. My name is Viola. I'm an SEO, and I run an agency called Flow SEO, and have been doing the last 3 webinars on marketers versus engineers, and excited to have you all here. So with that, we're going to kick this off by Bastian giving us some input, some food for thought on this entire discussion, technical versus UX. And then we're going to go into the panel, and I highly encourage you to type your questions in the chat bar as we go along, because that's going to be the fun part when we can answer your specific questions. So Bastian, over to you.
Yeah, so let's see if we are lucky and Chrome likes me.
Chrome likes you.
It looks like it does this time. So I guess lucky us. Yeah, so first of all, super excited to be with you guys. I think it's going to be a good one. So as Viola said, kind of a couple of thoughts and ideas, I think, around this. Yeah, what you said, I think I would agree, is a very, very, very long-standing debate. Let's call it that way. I want to start with a bit of a confession, actually, and that is that I'm actually really, really old. No kidding. So when I started, Google looked like this. That was like the end of the 90s. very weird. I'm by no means an expert in terms of UX or UI, I guess either way. But yeah, that was what we had to deal with end of the 90s, early 2000s. Search results somewhat looked like this. I'm not sure if you recall, but at that time, around 26, 27, we had this funny left-hand navigation even. And there was this massive outcry, I still recall it, when Google actually decided to kind of take it away. And like everyone was like, what the hell happened? So where's my navigation? How I'm supposed to use these strange search results now? And now, I mean, we have them back, right? Somewhat, at least, with COVID and some of the changes in the search results. Now, somewhat, we have again like this add-on left-hand navigation side, which I found quite amusing. But anyways, so back in the day, so this is actually taken from a slide deck that I used to present mid 2000s again, when I had to explain SEO to C-suite, and it kind of came down to three things basically. It was a search. It was kind of, you had to build a site that really was somehow crawlable, like plain old vanilla HTML. You need to have had some content there as well, obviously, but quality at that point in time didn't really matter. And it was links, right? It was all about links. And this is kind of how I explained it back in the day. And honestly, at that point in time, it was like, well, I could not have cared less, I have to admit, about delivering any decent experience, if you so will, because it just worked, right? Seriously, like if you had have done SEO at that point in time, it just wouldn't have had mattered. But I mean, that was my point, right? It had to be good when it was ranking, I guess, at least from Google's perspective. However, I mean, things change, right? And they have changed quite rapidly. So a bit later, so fast forward kind of 9-10 years, even I got a bit smarter and kind of was using, and I'm sure my panelists are now grinning, even though I can't see their screens, because that for them is obviously basic stuff. But things like readability, right, and other things like clickability or click friendliness, whatever you want to call it, at that point kind of started to get more important from an SEO perspective as well, right? So we had seen some algorithm rollouts and some changes in the search results and some changes in regards to how Google would actually evaluate content. And one thing became, at least at that point in time, a bit more obvious, and that is that they were not necessarily trying to rank kind of sites that had done best SEO, but rather that kind of deliver a decent, or at least an experience where people were happy with, right? But I mean, also to be fair, some of those trends really, I mean, I had to keep it somewhat, well, that I could put on a slide. I think I would have chosen kind of a different wording for it. But anyways, some trends really make me mad. And one of those was this. So we had a client, it's a German bank, and they had those, they thought they were trendy. And they used this burger navigation thing on the left-hand side for their desktop site. And guess what happened? I mean, everything went downhill from the point of when they rolled it out. And I think it was no surprise, but also from an SEO perspective, it was a disaster, right? They stripped out the links. Nothing was ranking anymore. And I was like, well, I mean, just kind of blindly following trends just without questioning them is maybe also not the answer either, right? So that really was annoying. Google started at that point in time pushing really various topics somewhat in parallel. And I think this was 2018, so it was a German article. My apologies for that, but I kind of took out the probably most important section there. So what happened was there were a bunch of SEOs kind of being asked for their thoughts on, what is Google doing in terms of machine learning and what kind of data sources are they potentially looking at. And one thing at that point, I think it was even before, but at that point people started talking about it, and that's like kind of 3 years back now. It's like, I was saying basically, I think that some of those metrics that you could also somewhat use to measure I would say, satisfaction. I'm not saying necessarily user experience, but at least user satisfaction. Something like time on site. And again, I do understand, and this is also what's written in the article. Of course, you can't globally say that a high time on site is always good, because I mean, let's say there's a price comparison and you find what you want very quickly, then potentially time on site in comparison is relatively low. But anyways, I think those Google looking at those individual factors became somewhat a bit more of I would say mainstream knowledge, right? And there's more, right? So I think the other thing, my other somewhat flaw, if you so will, is that I'm really impatient. I hate to wait. I think there's nothing or not much worse than having to wait for a website to kind of finish loading. So this really pisses me off. And also I found at the time GDPR pretty cool. And now you think this guy is entirely nuts, I guess. But hey, so just an example of why I found it quite interesting. USA Today is obviously a US publication. And what they had to do, because of the law change in the European Union, in Germany and some other countries as well, is that they basically had to build, or what they did is they built a stripped down version of their site that kind of removed all advertisement, all cookies, all JavaScript, everything that was just somewhat brought in by us as marketers. And all of a sudden that site made really, it was really fun to use it again, right? Because if you look at the performance metrics on the right-hand side, you would see okay, this kind of minimalistic European version, you could use it after 0.3 seconds versus the US site took 3.6 seconds and needed a total of 19 seconds where you could even really start interacting with the site. So no fun at all. And I guess it's relatively clear, and there's a bunch of studies, just one I quickly put in here is probably one of the more popular ones by Nielsen, where they relatively clearly state that you lose roughly half of people if you not manage to load a site in within 2 seconds. And so I think it's quite severe and actually quite clear that you do not have that much time. So for me, at least from an SEO perspective, and I've been talking about web performance specifically a lot, I think this is a huge chunk of a good, I would say, experience on any website, right? And I think if we just recap that, because those are actually quite old, 2010, Google first going on record saying, well, we use speed in rankings, right? And then confirming that somewhat a bit later when everyone was talking about mobile, I guess for good reason, 2018. So this is not a secret. And what's new, though, is Google's kind of continued push, right? So this is taken from the very latest version in Chrome, the 85, where they now introduced actually what's called fast page labeling. So they would actually tell you before you go to a website, you can test that if you just have a Chrome on any Android device now. Before you go on the website and you just kind of press the link but not kind of release straight away, it would tell you if that site is actually being fast. And I think lastly, this somewhat leads into this entirely, well, I wouldn't say new, but at least announcement that we finally have seen, where Google is trying to push kind of what's called Web Vitals, and Web Vitals being their idea to kind of evaluate a perceived user, but also page experience, right? So this, I think everything that we've seen before and some of the stuff that I've been showing before is there were some signs that Google potentially, algorithmically or not, looks into certain things that are UX relevant. But I think now we somewhat have this, I would say, official confirmation that at least in next year, I think it's March 2021, they will be looking in or at UX in a way that it is supposed to become part of a ranking factor. I guess waiting is still something. I just saw an article yesterday where I think some Google went on record saying, well, they don't think it's going to be kind of a mainstream or let's say super heavily weighted factor, but at least I guess we have this kind of official confirmation that also from an SEO standpoint, we should not really kind of not pay attention to anything in UX. So I think, from an SEO perspective, at least that would be my take on it, is that we do sometimes strange things and things for search engines, but they, usually require those things because what they have learned with machine learning and other things is that this is actually what their users really want, right? So I think that's a that would be my take on it. So I'm really curious what you guys think. So is it still one or the other? Not so much anymore. I don't know. So yeah, I'm quite curious to see what the take on the panel is actually.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Bastian. And the first thing I have to tell you is the attendees are very upset that you call yourself old. And,
well, that is true, though.
So, but now, I think what's kind of becoming obvious for me is like, Bastian, you seem to be very much on the technical and SEO side of things, which I mean, that's also the role we gave you in this panel. But I found it very interesting, the type of factors and issues that you raised in terms of internal links and in terms of page speed. There, I very much hear an SEO speaking. So when we talk about user experience, I think I might pass it over to Quinn first. When you hear the word user experience, what do you actually mean? And what are the things that you pay attention to? Do you pay attention to the same factors that Bastian just outlined? Or are you looking at a completely different thing to assess whether someone has a good user experience or not?
Yeah, so when someone has a good user experience on your site, it's basically every single touch point. Like, is it readable? Do they understand where it's at? Can they navigate to the parts of the site that they want to? Do they resonate with the branding? It's really a lot of different factors. Like, he did bring up some stuff about like page speed, and that is user experience. Like, if they're sitting there waiting, they're frustrated, right? And if they can't navigate to the part of the website that they want to because it's hidden by a hamburger on the desktop, like that's part of user experience as well. So for me, it's really every single touch point that they come into. It's not just about some of the technical parts.
Sweet. And then with that, maybe I'll suggest what are some things that you would say make out a good website, and a website that maybe both Google, but more importantly, also people love?
Yeah, I would say from a technical perspective, the speed and the interactivity are secondary experiences. And a lot of what people are looking for, we've talked about it with Hummingbird, is search intent, right? Like, does this website answer my questions? Usability is a thing, but more of what Quinn said of like resonating with the brand. Do I feel like they are serving me, or are they trying to pitch me something? I always look at like, what's the first piece of content that someone sees on a website? Is it a sales pitch, or is it something that a user is going to feel personally? And that's what I don't see in this algorithm update is the feeling side of things, right? How do you measure feelings? How do you measure a human emotional reaction to a website? We can measure how quickly the site loads. We can measure how fast they can get through to the pieces they're interested in, how the navigation works. But I think it is going to come down to there's an element missing of the, like, will machines ever be able to measure this? Of like, how does it make me feel when I land on that page? Do I feel like I trust them, or do I feel like, ooh, this isn't the site that I was looking for? I'm going to bounce and try something else.
Yeah, I love that, right? And I think that's maybe the like kind of like color and nuance that's a little bit hard to grab, at least today, with kind of like the factors that we have. So I'm kind of like curious, when you work with clients, in your experience, I would assume that people who come to Jess and Quinn very much made up their mind that they want to prioritize kind of like the branding side of things, the conversion side of things, and maybe it's a huge prejudice. I assume they come to Bastian for like organic growth and technical improvements, etc. So what's your experience when you consult? Where do you UX and SEOs clash? What are some of the most common issues that people have, and how do you navigate that?
So,
Quinn, go for it.
Sorry.
Please jump in. I love it.
Yeah, when clients kind of come to us, they do want the branding and user experience and stuff. And usually we're going through and we're researching their customers, why they're coming to the site, and all of that. And we're changing all of the copy. And usually they always freak out because they're like, oh, but I have my rankings. Now you're changing the copy. You're changing my keywords. And so there is a little bit of a battle, even though if clients come to us for that, it's like, okay, yeah, you might lose your rankings for a short time, sometimes about like, it's usually like 20%, but then it's going to bounce back kind of later. So that is kind of like I guess a back and forth debate that I've had with my clients. So just wanted to bring that up.
Agreed. Bastian, how does it look like for your clients and projects? Where do people put their priority?
I would say it really depends on their primary goals, right? But if it's organic growth, then I mean, one channel probably usually is in the lead, I would say, and then but that doesn't mean that. So what Quinn just said is, I mean, that's very true, right? There's it's a thin line if you, for whatever reason, have to change over entire copy. I mean, there's no way for Google at that point in time when you just strip out content. I mean, you can't rank for what's not there, right? That's the way it is. So I think it's just a decision that you need to take. So either you are willing or okay to lose that, for whatever period in time, or you're not, right? And I think if I'd be asked to kind of ensure organic growth, then I will be the blocker and say, well, if that goes, then I mean, fair enough. But and I understand maybe because you want to change your branding message or you want to change the perception of the site, right? This is something that I didn't touch on, obviously, coming from a more tech background. I mean, I agree with what Jess said. I mean, it basically, there's a bunch of things around in content, tone of voice, and a bunch of other things where it's getting harder and harder for algorithms to measure that. And I think, though, if you turn it around, I think this is also where they made the biggest improvements, right? If I would have done content 5 years back, I'm kind of embarrassed to look at what ranked at that point in time, which is not ranking anymore. I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect, far from. One of my biggest things is I'm really constantly pissed off with e-com and retail when you have those category listings where you just want to shop and you want to see the products. And as SEO, literally sometimes we do not have much choice except for to stick some content on it because the damn page is just not ranking, right? I'm not saying I like it. I'm not saying it's the way it should be. But the question is, can you really afford to not be there as long as everyone else is? I think this is a big issue, right? And I recall I've been standing on stages and saying that for years now, but it's far from perfect, sadly.
I think there's an interesting balance where UX starts to play in with SEO, and this is what I've pushed for a lot when I'm consulting. Is yes, you have to have the content on the page. No, it doesn't necessarily need to be the first thing that people see. I think hierarchy and logical reading order is super vital, especially from a user's perspective, right? If you don't show me the first thing I'm looking for, and then you like all this filler content that you probably need to rank, but you're going to put it at the top, or you can't think of creative ways to put it in the background or to the side or something, like help me focus my attention on the pieces that I'm looking for. And I think we've been learning that skill over the last 8 or 10 years. But I remember 10 years ago, it didn't matter. We had to, keyword first and then second keyword and then tertiary keyword. And you get into and users would just look at this and be like, I don't understand why this copy's on this page. Well, we kind of have to do it for Google. And they're like, yeah, but I'm buying the thing. I'm like, yeah, yeah, we know. But I think I love seeing how this is sort of converging into SEO is starting to support users, and users are giving feedback of what's working well, so that it's influencing SEO and the search engines better.
Yeah, I agree. I think what's interesting is, I don't know if and you can tell me maybe if you have, it's been playing a lot with the kind of also like sentiment analysis tools, trying to see in which way Google understands what we're actually writing. Does it understand the topic, the subtopics? Does it understand if it's a positive and negative article? And it seems to be that they're getting a lot better understanding in terms of what people want to see for certain queries and what's the color of each article. But this actually, I think you guys touched on this, but this is actually the specific question that we also have from the audience, which I think, again, is specifically the fight that you just discussed, is like copy versus how much people actually need to read. Our audience doesn't want to read so much, but we need the words for Google. So maybe especially like Jess and Quinn, do you have some creative ideas on how you solve the problems of slapping the content on the category pages? What are some things that people can do if they have one of those pages that just desperately need content, but they want it to look better?
So are you talking about like stuff on the homepage or throughout like the whole website?
I think there's a couple probably pages that are issue pages, right? Probably homepage, sales pages, category pages. Like if you want to have a chance for ranking, but you still want to convert, maybe you don't want to,
So a
have
lot
your
of
wall of
times,
text on there.
yeah, so for me, it's about progressively revealing information. Like, what's the first thing they need to know when they're on your homepage or that site or that landing page? What's the second thing they need to know? What's the third thing they need to know? And kind of giving hierarchy to that. So with Google, that can be your H1, H2, H3. So it's giving kind of structure to that for Google and an importance to that. And when I'm trying to put in additional information or stuff like that, a lot of times I put it in the FAQs. So that way I can accordion them, so I can make them small, but they're still on the page. So when people click them, they can get a lot more information. And that way I can put all those words, all those texts, all those explanations, but it's not going to overwhelm them with that information when they come to the page. And when they have the question, they can go and kind of easily find that. That's one of the things that we've done to kind of put those things on sites. Jess, do you have any others?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to take the human tack on this one. This is the point where I always go back to the SEO and say, do you have to have all of this content? Like, do we need 300 words, or could we just have 150? And if we had 150, which ones? Like, go do your research and help me understand what search intent is bringing people to our site. And then what do we want to rank for? And then how do we put that kind of content where people are going to see it first? I have always developed like a weird back and forth relationship with SEOs where I kind of like elbow them. I'm like, I think you could do your job better. Go do research. You've got all the tools, right? You can look at what people are doing. You can look at how Google's working. Tell me what we need to do, and then let me check it with humans and see if we're hitting the order and the structure. And this might be a really controversial take, but I hate FAQs. I don't know how users respond to them. I've not actually tested it. It's not a thing, but I feel like if you can't build the content into your site in a natural way, and you have to shove it into like a big file folder of like, oh, here's some stuff we thought of secondly that you might want to know, then maybe you need to reconsider how the site's built. That's my hot take.
I love it. Bastian, do you have any thoughts on kind of like read more boxes, FAQ, accordions, etc., from an SEO perspective?
Oh boy. Where to start, where to end, right? I guess, but it kind of goes back to what Jess was saying. I think just putting content for the sake of content, if you've been doing that, you've been doing SEO all wrong anyways. So I think this is not really the answer to it. I think the answer is a bit twofolded. So I think in the past, we would have had more of a discussion between SEO and UX, because we as SEOs were very keen on having content not being folded due to this nonsense statement that was out there at some point that, what has less visibility or requires some kind of user interaction, that I think was what the wording was, would potentially get less weighting. And that's a problem, obviously. I mean, if you want to rank for it and it gets less weighting, then, well, I can't build a strategy on that, right? So that just doesn't work. So either it's there or it's not there. I think what changed, though, and that's kind of the good thing, I guess, with all this mobile first initiatives that Google somewhat pushed around, them saying now, well, you know what, like, it's kind of known, and you guys can tell me if that's true or not, it's kind of a known concept in the mobile world, so to speak, and therefore, folding and read more and whatnot is fine, right? So we being Google, giving that kind of the same weight. So sites now being primarily being indexed with a mobile crawler. I mean, not everyone is, but I think we are like at 60-70%. And then I think they just postponed the deadline to next year due to COVID. But hey, I mean, at least next year, then everyone's supposed to be scored by kind of mobile first metrics and their mobile sites. I think that makes it a bit easier. So it kind of goes back to what do you really need, as Jess said, entirely correct. And then you can use those patterns, which I would say is fine. We tested it just recently for desktop. It doesn't work for mobile. It does work indeed. However, though, clinical testing, as we all know in SEO, is not that simple. But yeah, I think the downside is if you don't have it entirely, at least for now, again, goes back to what can you afford to have or not have. You do not have a use case for FAQ markup. That drives a whole bunch of traffic for like, not the transactional queries, but like all informational ones. So if you want to kind of grab the question traffic, and that's part of your strategy, and that's traffic that you can convert, then you need to have the question somewhere. Question is it a separate section? Is it the same page? Probably a different story. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm glad you say this. I've been in love with the FAQ schema.
Obviously.
But yeah, again, maybe that's the SEO who's just like, more real estate on page 1. I need that question under my search result.
That's the nature of the beast, I guess. Yeah.
If you come at it from a CRO perspective, though, Bastian, your point was really good. Can you convert that traffic? I think, and I don't have enough studies to back this up, but I think most FAQ traffic is sort of a dead end. And either people aren't using it well enough to say, okay, now that you have your answer, here's an action to take off of this FAQ, or it's like we're trying to guess what you might have questions about. We don't actually know what people are asking questions about, and we need to do more user research to understand where the questions are about our product or our service. And then we can provide relevant questions that then we could say, here's the next action. We can follow that click flow through and see that, oh, people are actually going to a purchase page, or they're taking action on this, and we're meeting metrics instead of just these kind of dead end folder things that I mean, heat maps. That's what I'm remembering is looking at FAQs on heat maps, and it was just like open, close, open, close, open, close. I'm like, okay, so they're using them, but that doesn't tell me if they're gaining value, if users are gaining value, humans are gaining value out of these questions, or if it's just filler content that's working for Google, but we're not sure it's working for us. And that's kind of that balance, right? Is I want the website to work for me, and I want it to work for Google, and I also want it to work for people. And so who do we put first, and how do we play this game? If I'm just working for Google, I may not make money off of that, and people might not like it.
Or maybe if you're very blunt, it's just a desperate SEO's play, right? I think this is the other side of the story. I mean, let's be honest, right? Maybe it's just a chase for more traffic because I either can't make it for the right terms, that could be one, or I'm just trying to see what I can get, right? I mean, the other side of the story, though, is just to maybe a quick follow-up comment on that. I mean, I think since the traffic is relatively cheap and the comparison is oftentimes not as crazy, so if you can take it, even if you can convert it to a way lower, like in a very lower percentage, that might still be worth it, right? So I think there's no one unique answer, but I agree with you. Oftentimes it's just for the sake of ranking there, and then you just don't get anything, or they just do a shit SEO, a shit CRO on-site job. That could also be true, right? I mean,
well, I love it as test content, right? Let's put a bunch of FAQs out and watch it, and know that we're looking at an experiment, and just see where people are going, and then we can optimize the content on the website to answer their questions in a more natural flow instead of in this folder. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I like that, and I'm going to be even wilder. I'm going to suggest getting even another party involved into this, which is your paid team. I think that's what educational queries and informational queries are really good. It's like they feed your remarketing pixel. They probably, if you have some sort of like lead magnets or webinars following up that you can drive people towards with your Facebook ads, etc., that I think is probably some potential in this more informational, educational queries. Actually, let me bring something up that I was thinking what Bastian said about the mobile first index. So I'd be curious, in your experience and your practice, where do you start? Like when you design a page, either as an SEO or as a UX designer, do you start with the mobile version or do you start with the desktop version? And how do you make that decision?
For us, we always start with the desktop version. I know that the mobile version, there was this big trend like years ago to go mobile first. But for us, it's about kind of designing an experience and figuring out, like, whether you're doing mobile or desktop, it's like, what's the most important thing for them to know? It's about really, really knowing your user, and mobile versus desktop really doesn't matter. It's however they're going to view that content. So it's like, what's the most important thing that they want to know when they land on that page, and making sure that they're getting that information no matter what format they're getting it from, whether it's mobile or their desktop or their iPad or what have you.
Yeah, for me, I always start mobile first, just because it's 50% of the world traffic is on mobile devices, and it's the fastest, most condensed version of the site that you're going to make. So it's context, right? I'm on a phone, I have maybe 3 minutes. I need to know vital pieces, and then I can scale it back out. So for me, it helps kind of build a hierarchy or a structure for the whole site. To start with, here are the 5 basic things. I like to use restaurants as an example. I need to know their phone number, their address, when the bar closes, and like their hours or something, like something really small on my phone, super fast. And then as I get closer, I might see what's on the menu tonight. And then as I'm there, I might read about the chef. But right, I want to start with, I'm in my car, I have 30 seconds, and I'm talking to Siri, and I need to know when the bar closes. So that's where we start with, and then we build back out. And it's easier. I think it's easier to add content than it is to take away. And so for me, I kind of embraced mobile first, because desktop first was really hard to get this huge spread of stuff and try to figure out how it works. And then you had to kind of reduce it down into this mobile version. And a lot of times what we saw with the mobile version was like stuff got hidden that was.
Oh, I think now Jess froze. Is that just for me or for you guys also?
Yeah,
No,
for me
not
as
the
well.
same.
So to improve the user experience of this webinar, we're completely going to cut her off and going to send this over to you, Bastian. How do you go about this?
Well, I think it's kind of the same, right? It's kind of the same from an SEO, at least now from an SEO standpoint, right? So they kind of, as Jess was saying very much correctly, so you have a very limited kind of screen reader estate. So I think if you can deliver for that and then enrich towards a desktop, I think that's a flow that you can do. However, I can also see Quinn's way of doing it, because at the end of the day, there's oftentimes way much more that you can do with a desktop in comparison to what you can do on a mobile phone, and potentially the use cases are also very, very much different, right? So I think there's not this one answer to it. It heavily depends on the site and on the product or service or whatever you want to sell. Technically, from an SEO perspective, I think it very much depends on it depends on the tech setup, right? So is it responsive? Is some part of the experience being done through a progressive web app, or whatever stuff is involved in this entire experience? So I think there's not this one answer, but at least what made it a bit easier from my perspective is that we now at least have the smaller version, if that makes sense, like the mobile version as the primary one. So if we want to rank, and I think this is fair enough, right? Because what we had in the past is like you were ranking for stuff that your desktop site had, but it wasn't even on the mobile phone. You landed on that mobile experience, you couldn't find the stuff. So this was super frustrating. And then we're back to like bouncing or whatever metric we want to take to measure any kind of satisfaction. And that was just not the case. So I think it's at least a bit clearer now on how we, like from SEO standpoint, we can do it. But I can see both ways equally working, depending on what you are trying to achieve.
Yeah, and it also depends on what's the for the actual site, what they're trying to achieve. Because there's one site that we're working on where it's 90% mobile traffic, so we don't care about desktop at all. We're just kind of designing what's on that mobile site. And then there's also different intents. Like some people may go to a website when they're on their mobile phone, like taking the train to work or what have you, but they're not actually going to buy. So they're really looking for information about like whatever it is. And then they actually come back later through retargeting or whatever to the desktop version. And then that's where they're actually like purchasing. So a lot of times the mobile and desktop experiences need to be completely different depending on kind of what's happening.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say, right? So I can totally see your way of doing that. Makes a lot of sense when you have that. I mean, as you said, like if it's 90-ish%, why would you even bother about anything desktop? So no.
I have a question for what is now the two of you. Something that we touched upon in the last webinar is kind of like website building and CMS have become really, really good. So when we think about WordPress and then the themes and plugins that are there, we have Spotify, web shops that look quite good. We have Wix, Squarespace, whatever we have. So I think making a site that looked like somewhat good, like if we think about the Google screenshot from Bastian from before, like websites looked similar, they didn't really look that good. And maybe the CMS and the plugins today, they allow us to make a site look good, pretty cheap, pretty easy. There's a lot of like phenomenal template that out of the gate make the site pretty well organized. And then on top of that, we started to understand that we all want our logo in the top left to come back to the homepage. We kind of want our header a certain way. And then on top of this, there's an SEO coming in and he says, or she says, you're in this niche. This is what your 4 hubs should be. These are the articles that your competitors are ranking for. These is the blog posts that everyone is having. So you should be having them too. So I'm just wondering, are we getting into a universe where everyone becomes a clone of a clone of a clone of following the best practice of the perfect template that it got out of the CMS, following the exact content that everyone on page 1 is having? So I suppose, how do we actually stay creative and unique? And how do we make sure that people actually remember our site and we don't get lost in a sea of good-looking pages with the perfect blog post that everyone else has too? All right, Bastian, I'm going to let you start with this.
Yeah, right. You picked the most creative person in the chat. That makes a lot of sense. Where to start, where to end? Yeah, I mean, for me, I can see from an SEO perspective, I can see why this happens, right? So what you do is you would go and you would look at what's currently ranking in the top 10 or top 20 or whatever. And if you're not there, I mean, of course, it's kind of the current moment, but what's ranking is obviously, at least in Google's eyes. So if you just look at that from a core like SEO standpoint, that seems to be the best result, although the best results, probably better said. And apparently, for whatever reasons, and for whatever kind of parts of algorithms decided that to be the case, right? That could be engagement metrics. That could just be because if it's a very kind of, you said, it's a niche potentially, they might not even have enough data for that. So it's probably solely content or content and a bit of domain authority. Either way, right? I can see why this is happening, but I think if we all do just that and not trying to be a bit better, and a bit better doesn't mean 100 words more content, right? Then the question is also from the other side of the of that, like, why, if there's an established top 10, and that's a mistake that I see a lot of SEOs making, if there's established top 10, and I just do what everyone else is doing in top 10, why should Google even put me there? I mean, like, if there's 10, there's only so much space, right? And real estate and search results is getting smaller. We see less and less results, especially for higher volume keywords, for branded keyword queries and whatnot. Like, it's not necessarily 10 links anymore. I think the opposite is true. There's oftentimes a whole bunch of Google assets. I do not think that just doing that is good enough, but I can see why you would at least have a look and use that potentially as an orientation as to what is currently necessary. But again, this is only the SEO angle. I think what's missing is probably even way earlier in the journey, something like, what are the personas, what is the target audience, what Quinn said earlier, what is the product, what is the potential in terms of traffic and who is using that and how, right? So I don't think just that is the right way to do it, to be honest.
Agreed. Quinn, I'd be curious to see what you say in terms of creating something unique.
Yeah, so I think when everybody's kind of getting started, they use templates and they kind of put that out there. There's a lot of really good templates out there, and you're right, a lot of the sites do look the same, but they can still work, and you can still rank really well on them. But when you're really trying to get to that next level, I think that's where branding and a lot of kind of that customization really comes into play. Oh man, my headphones are about to die. So when like for example, we worked on the site 16 Personalities. They're a free personality test site. So when we first came to them, they all looked the same, like against all the other sites. So we came in and we added branding to that. We added custom characters for all of their thing. And what happened is that went completely viral, and now they completely dominate the search engine. They have, I think last time I checked, 29,000 keywords they rank #1 for, including free personality tests, which has like 600,000 or 700,000 rankings per month. So if you really, this is where I think like standing out with design is like really bringing in that branding and not using stock icons, getting an illustrator to kind of really come in and bring your brand. And more people are going to trust that, more people are going to link to it, and it kind of has these down effects as you go through that.
But I mean, what you're saying there is another great example for why actually I think SEO and UX come much closer together. Because I mean, at the end of the day, from an SEO perspective, we probably now more than maybe years back, but we significantly also benefit from branded traffic and brand search queries, right? In every form. So I completely agree. Like, I think branding, or even one step further, becoming a synonym for something that you're trying to achieve is probably the highest goal, right? I mean, I know there's this discussion a lot of times that you can't like isolate, let's say, the effect of TV advertisement on search rankings. I would argue that is only half true, because we have seen, and we have done it a lot of times in the last years for like very, very large and also smaller companies actually. You see an effect that somewhat is, I mean, of course, immediately that's traffic, fine, fair enough. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you see like longer lasting effects of like increased brand search volume, and that all over the board helps you as a brand to differentiate from the rest, and that somewhat kind of boost up your rankings as well. So I'm not saying do TV advertising for the sake of it, but I think branding makes a whole bunch of sense for a lot of reasons, as you said very much correctly. Yeah.
I love that. And I'll tell you a little story that we've been discussing in our SEO nerd corner, and I'm curious to see what you guys think about it. I mean, a pretty common backlink strategy is this idea that you build some sort of like ultimate guide about a topic. So people call it guide, skyscraper technique, etc. And then either you reach out to people, you ask in their articles to link to that resource, or you reach out to people who've linked to your competitors and you ask to link to your guide instead. And we actually, obviously, you know, we've been talking about the guide needs to be long and all these things. Longer articles seem to be collecting more links. But what we've been wondering is lately we've been seeing, if you make a really good looking guide, so a guide that has a beautiful header, a guide that has nice custom graphics in it, maybe some statistics that you revamped in your look, maybe not a huge branding, but in your look, that they seem to be getting a lot more links. And so I've been wondering with the proper SEO nerds, what happens if we actually make a guide that is only design? Like, what if a guide actually is lorem ipsum content, more or less, so dummy content, but only good looking? Would people link to it? And our assumption is that the game of links might have shifted in such a way that because people only glance at the stuff so briefly, that it might actually work. So I'd be curious, Bastian, on your thought, whether we think that we can push it so far. And I know some friends who are working on this. I'll update you at some point telling what the results of these tests are. But I do think in terms of like link building, visibility, actually like having a chance of being shared on social media, I think the design is probably more crucial than the actual writing, just because we're all skimming and scrolling so fast. We're not really reading well.
Can I jump in on that one?
Please,
Yeah.
please. By all
Yeah.
means.
So, like, the point of design is to amplify the words, right? So, if you have like words that are like meaningless and you add design to it, it's not really going to get the results that you want. It's at the core of like why someone buys something or why someone gets value out of it. It's because of the words that they're connecting with, right? And the design just adds to that and helps amplify that message. There's a thing called the halo effect, and it's basically a cognitive bias, which means if this one thing is good, then this other thing must be good. So if they go to your like this article that's beautifully designed and they read the words and they're like, oh, that's amazing, and it's also designed well, they're like, oh, this is like really valuable. It just kind of amplifies that emotion that they're having. So I think if you put laureates with just like a pretty design, I don't think it would get the results that you're looking for. I just want to say that.
I love
No,
that you're. I love
I
that
agree.
you're the one saying this, Quinn. I think that
Yeah.
that is counter to my point.
I think, yeah, true. I think it's what you're observing is something different. It's not so much that, I mean, yeah, you're right. Everyone and their mother is doing the ultimate guide to XYZ, and I'm tired of it. It's kind of annoying by now. I don't believe you anyways, because usually you're not the authority, you're not the brand, so you're in no position to even publish that guide, no matter if it's beautiful or not. But from what we've seen, and we have been playing the link game for quite a while, we have earned a bit of recognition for that, I think. And I think it's more that you need to produce outstanding work. And if you and that needs to be different from what's there, in a sense of not necessarily long, but just like, if you don't put effort in it, why should actually someone recommend it, right? So I don't see, and that doesn't, I mean, again, if it's something that's very unique. So I give you an example, right? So we had a campaign that we did in the past where it was about gas price comparison. Funny enough, super boring topic, super boring industry. But so what happens is, like in at least in Germany, but it's true in most of the other countries as well, we have like the big vacation, right? And like the summer vacation. And what happens is, straight before, like, so Germans tend to travel a lot in Europe with car. I mean, not now, but I mean, before Corona at least. So what obviously happens is that there are some people that are a bit more, let's say, cost sensitive. And so they want to know, if I go to Denmark, what is the price for refilling my car? So all the big newspapers and publications were essentially just doing kind of a cover that, of course, surprise, surprise, big vacations, prices go up, right? And everyone was just referencing like a super outdated, old, ugly Excel spreadsheet where they use it as a data source. So what we ended up doing for that client is we basically built like a nice embeddable table, which was interactive, which kind of took the data from an API. We went through all the article, like through all the old sources that kind of published that the years before. We just kind of reseeded a better source, which was nicer, more credible, a bit more usable, had a bit more like this kind of engagement playing thing to it. Everyone used it. So this is how you kind of build links, right? It was something, it doesn't need to be crazy long or whatever. I mean, that thing built like 300 domains in one season, and we're still using it. So I think it's not only about design, but I think it plays a significant role in what Quinn was saying. If you want to transport something, it looks shit, then it might also not really convert well. So it's a bit of in between. That's at least my take from a content link building perspective.
Yeah, I love that example. And I think it also, so it kind of fits with that sometimes the stuff that ranks is not the long form article about it. It's actually the thing, right? If you type in stopwatch, you want to have a stopwatch. You don't want to have a 2,000 word article on why the stopwatch is
and how it works.
great to you. But I actually be curious. So if you do this kind of things, if you do this kind of creative campaigns, do you do them predominantly as to create a linkable asset and make that a backlink target? Or do you also associate some keywords with it that you're trying to rank for?
I think it's a broader discussion, right? We are not a branding agency, that's for sure. But I think so, like, because content marketing can be everything and anything, right? So I think when we build content assets, it's first and foremost for interaction, either in social or in terms of links. But clearly, if it's the latter, then it has to have some certain metrics to it, and that can be rankings. However, though I'm not the biggest fan on measuring things with rankings, because it fluctuates too much. So it's probably more engagement on that piece, impressions on that piece, which you can easily do if it's iframe content, for example. So that, and then subsequently there's of course also targets in terms of branding or views or whatever that are somewhat tied into it. But we usually not primarily build, and that might be different for others, assets for the sake of branding, but more for the sake of getting any kind of referral to it. Yeah.
Right. I like that. So maybe as we are reaching towards kind of like the end of the webinar, what are some things both in terms, where's the intersection basically? How do we future-proof our website? How do we make sure that our kind of like design and user experience is going in the right direction? How do we make sure we're not leaving money on the table on the SEO side of things because our website is slow and ugly? What are some tips that you would give people from your area of expertise if they want to future-proof their website in that way?
So one of the things that we've done on our client sites is we do a lot of usability testing. Really, it's just watching a human go to your website and use it and try to accomplish a task. And can they do it or can they not? And then making changes to that, because if they can't find something, if they're leaving, then that's going to affect your bounce rate, which Google's algorithm, like we talked about earlier, they can't really talk about the feeling. Like the algorithm can't understand the feeling, but they can see that, like, oh, you went somewhere you couldn't find and you left. So it's kind of understanding how people are using your website and making sure it's as frictionless as possible. That's what I found is pretty much the easiest way to do that.
Yeah, and it ties in nicely with a lot of the kind of things that SEOs want to accomplish as well, right? So if, as you said, like if task completion is an issue, then that's something that you want to get rid of anyways, no matter if you start from one angle or the other. And I would argue the same is true for things like performance, which, I mean, if this, as you said earlier, if the site is slow, I mean, that touch point doesn't work, right? So if you have a fast search result and you're landing on something that just you can't use, you're gone. So same story. I think most of the sites that we are seeing right now, it's not the crazy advanced things. It's more the basics where it's already broken. So that can be performance. That can be, as we had earlier, just entirely wrong contents for the sake of just targeting something, trying to rank for something, but just can't convert that. So again, results in bad metrics. You're out of the game. So kind of, I would honestly start with the basics. I also love like Jess' take on kind of structure, because from an SEO perspective, it's even a bit, that as well got a bit easier, right? I think there's a bunch of statements out there that so that being the SEO perspective, I'm not saying, please don't quote me on that, headlines are not important, but I think this over obsession in terms of headlines is also something that's just not really helpful. So sit together with the UX guys, try to see what they come up with in terms of what users actually need, and that usually works for SEO as well, at least by now. So I think it should be much more hand in hand than some of the most successful projects we've done recently, where just like when we kind of tried to take budgets from like both ends and just bring it together.
Sweet, I love that. And we kind of reaching the end of this. We sadly lost Jess to what
along the way
connectivity issue. She said she heard the transformer blow, so it seems that she actually lost electricity due to the storm entirely. But we will make sure that on the description of this webinar, you're going to find her stuff and how you can find her in terms of like social profiles and website. But Quinn, where can people find you online if they want to reach out or learn more about the things that you're passionate about?
Yeah, so I'm at Quinzeda, QUINNZEDA, on most social medias, Twitter, Instagram, and all that. And my platform is conversioncrimes.com.
Perfect. Bastian, where can people follow you?
I guess the easiest is pa.ag. Just get in touch through the website. Then that is usually the fastest way to get hold of me. Or Twitter equally works.
Sweet. Yeah, and I just see, I think probably Kate popped in our Twitter handles,
Yeah.
which is actually not the best way to find me. I'm a weird SEO who mainly hangs out on Instagram. But yeah, flow-seo.com is probably where you can find me as well. And just a quick announcement, we haven't set the date yet, but we're definitely going to have a new episode of Engineers versus Marketers coming up. And it's going to be about local and international search and how do we balance the needs? What are the different strategies? Where the same, where they different? So stay tuned for the announcement for the next webinar on this. And then just, I don't know, Quinn, Bastian, do you have any final words, anything that we didn't have the chance to address that you want to let people know before we end this?
I can't think of anything.
That's a shame. I always said like ladies first, but hey, okay. Well, no, again, for me, it's really, I think it's less of a versus than a together these days. So I would strongly recommend and argue for trying to tap into the resources that other teams have and see what you can do together. That I think, at least from an SEO perspective right now, seems to be the better way than fighting A for resources and B than not getting what you want. So yeah, I would rather go that way, I think.
Yeah, they're really intermingled together. I don't think it's an either or.
Yep.
I always think this. I mean, when we talk about these things like structure and finding things on the top of the page, we always say like the algorithm wants this, but I think people want this too. We want a well-sorted, like good-looking page where we can find our stuff. So yeah, it was super exciting to discuss today, and I love that we got to talk about some of the common SEO UX fights like copy length and accordance and all this stuff. But I'm actually also a little bit happy that there's many things that we can agree upon, and that creating something unique and interesting ultimately is also something that people want to link to, that people want to buy from. So I think we agree in that regard. And thank you both for your time. Thank you for everyone tuning in, asking questions, putting in comments, and we're looking forward to having you back on the next webinar.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.